I won't bury the lead. It's both. And it's so much more than both. The answer to that question is not the interesting part. It's the consideration process as you think through the implications of I Ching as philosophy and I Ching as fortune-telling or divination. The historical origins of the I Ching is to receive understanding of Tian Ming, the mandate of heaven. Now, what does that mean? The philosopher will have a philosophical interpretation of what that means, and the fortune teller will read the signs and omens as supernatural communication. The legends of the origins of I Ching sure point to it as being divinatory. While imprisoned by the king of Shang, King Wen of Zhou receives revelation of the I Ching hexagram images and uses those images to divine that the mandate of heaven has passed from the Shang to his clan. Shang, Shang, Shang Cao. I never know how exactly to pronounce it in English. The Battle of Muye Zizan, that took place around 1046 BC, then marks the fall of the 500-year Shang dynasty, and thus King Wen's prophecy comes true. And the mandate of heaven passes to the Zhou, ushering in a golden age for historical imperial China. The Zhou dynasty is when Chinese philosophy as we know it today was birthed. It is during the Zhou that we get Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, and meanwhile over on the Indian peninsula during the Magna Empire, Buddhism. One of the key texts that Confucianists, Taoists, and legalists, and then later Buddhist scholars systematically study is the I Ching. The imperial exams or civil service examinations that every scholar in China had to pass to become part of the literati, aristocracy, and political court tested your proficiency of the 5 classics, which incidentally corresponds with the Wuxing 5 alchemical changing phases. Wood, Book of Songs on poetry. Fire, Book of Documents on rhetoric. Earth, Book of Rites on ceremonial etiquette. Metal, Book of Seasons, also known as the Spring and Autumn Annals on history, and the Book of Changes, Water, the I Ching, on metaphysics and the mysteries of the universe. And because of that legacy tied to the 5 classics, scholarship and imperial examinations, the I Ching is associated with academia. So to say the origins of the I Ching are rooted in philosophical discourse, you would be correct. Let's read through some of the line text together just to see what exactly we're dealing with when we study the Book of Change. The well water is drinkable, but no one drinks. This brings great sadness to my heart. Hexagram 48, the fountainhead, line 3. That was one of the few instances in which the oracle text is written in first person. This brings great sadness to my heart. It's interpreted as an unseen or underappreciated resource. A spiritual religious reading of the line is that of the weeping god. There are 3 sojourners. One sojourner will leave. One sojourner walks on alone. That sojourner will meet another. Hexagram 41, line 3. A gathering of 3 brings one too many ideas, leaving the minority to feel excluded. This line is often interpreted as referencing third wheel syndrome. The king gives chase to the birds and beasts from 3 sides, leaving a path for the prey to survive. The fiefdom is spared, an auspicious omen. That's line 5 of Hexagram 8. The line is about ethical hunting practices, with hunting being a metaphor, naturally. When you know you're stronger or superior to your opponent, to be virtuous, you need to give your opponent a way out, even while you battle to take them down. But hey, that's just my interpretation. What's yours? The Book of Changes intrigues scholars and philosophers for how it is fundamentally a book on first principles, a visual discourse on space and time, change itself, and the theory of existence delineated by mathematical functions and calculus. When you look at one of the hexagrams, such as hexagram 32, Heng, the eternal, the 2 trigrams it's comprised of is thunder over wind. This is also the midpoint of the 64 hexagram sequence. And then thunder over wind, per the I Ching, begets constancy, Heng. The word Heng dates back to the Shang dynasty, first found on oracle bones. Etymologically, it is the sun, the solar path sandwiched in between heaven and earth, this idea that change is the only constant, the changing cycles of the calendar. And that change, the solar path, the path of the sun, occurs in repetitive cyclic phases. Thus, it is constancy, it is the eternal. That eternal state of transformation, however, is what inspires growth. And so what does thunder over wind convey to us? The philosopher will ruminate on the many ways you can approach interpreting that specific pattern of light and dark, yin and yang lines, and the alchemy of combining the element thunder as you observe it in nature with the element of wind as you observe it in nature. The fortune teller will consult the many metaphysical correspondences to thunder and wind, the meeting of the rabbit and the serpent, and the common denominator of wood as the driving force of both thunder and wind. So this hexagram is about the reproductive system, metabolism, sentimentality, determination, persistence, the path of Jupiter in the skies, growth, the Confucian virtue of benevolence, and utilizing the heavenly stem and earthly branch correspondences to predict dates. In fortune telling, hexagram 32 is about marriage and mutually reciprocal unions. In Taoist philosophy, hexagram 32 is what Lao Tzu associated with the luminous void, the Tao, as the eternal constant of change. It's also a book that inspires reflection on moral values, morality being what is the right action to take given the situation, what type of character and code of conduct should you embody. This is basically the core theme of the I Ching, with all its repeated reference to the Junzi, the sage, or your higher self. It also repeatedly makes reference to Daren, the eminent one, the great one, and Shaoren. Directly translated might mean the inferior one, but is a moral reference to one who is not taking the right action given the situation. Here's a reference to Junzi and Shaoren, the sage or the higher self, and the inferior one. Here I use the unprincipled one. The unprincipled, the inferior one, uses excessive force. The sage, the Junzi, uses effortless action. Hexagram 34, line 3. Hexagram 36. The sage serves the many with unselfish concern for the multitude and the myriad things. Tend to the soldiers, to the farmers, the tradesmen, the scholars, and the officials. You can see how this is very much a book of morality or moral code of conduct. Hexagram 39. The sage cultivates virtue through self-reflection. Hexagram 40, line 5. The sage releases the tension. The sage wins the trust of the commoners. Hexagram 41, where there is distress, the sage will tame anger and desire. So it's basically a bunch of maxims or axioms on how to comport your behavior given certain situations if you want to embody the sage, the Junzi. Hexagram 27, Junzi, the sage is prudent in speech so that only nourishing words are spoken. So yeah, the I Ching is very much a book on ethics. Because of this core attribute of the Zhouyi, I would make the case that if you are looking for a divination system that tells you follow your bliss, you do you, you're perfect as you are, the I Ching is probably not it. So there really is no doubt that I Ching is philosophy, is a book that presents a systematic overview of the fundamentals of nature, knowledge, and the human condition. Specific to Chinese philosophy, questions around spiritual cultivation tend to be at the forefront of philosophical discourse. What does the I Ching reveal to us about consciousness and how to refine human consciousness? Yet how the I Ching was conceived, or more accurately, the mindset under which this book was divinely received, is more shamanistic than anything else. Just read the line text attributed to the Duke of Zhou. Ominous to proceed, auspicious to proceed, in 3 days' time, blah, blah, blah. Fortunate if you blah, blah, blah. Misfortune befalls if you blah, blah, blah. Many of the passages are unequivocally prophetic in wording. They do read like fortune-telling divinatory reading results. Within the lines of the 10 wings portion of the I Ching, there are passages about communicating with spirits, Shen, through rites and rituals, because it is through rites and rituals that you can unite heaven and earth. Historically, the divination method with the I Ching is heavily ritualized and approached with utmost reverence. According to the 10 Wings commentary on the I Ching, extensive preparation must take place prior to divination with the I. You study the I as a philosopher scholar so that you have the spiritual cultivation needed for successful divination. You then consult the I in its divinatory capacity to further advance your knowledge and understanding. It really isn't until the modern age that we get a little more tongue-in-cheek and playful with the Book of Change. When it comes to taking firm sides and drawing lines in the sand between either approaching the I Ching as a book of philosophy or approaching the book as fortune-telling, our motive for characterizing these two approaches as mutually exclusive is worth commenting on. There are socioeconomic and classist implications to this sort of rhetoric. When you conceptualize philosophy, the subtext is arguably masculine, associated with specialized knowledge or education, training, and socioeconomic privilege. When you conceptualize fortune-telling, the subtext is arguably feminine, associated with intuitive and instinctual abilities, superstition, and something that would mark you as part of the lower or uneducated classes. So I think that is worth unpacking. When those who are not part of the literati or academic elite operate the I Ching for their own purposes, it's frowned upon. Instead of criticizing use of the I Ching as fortune-telling, it's worth a self-examination of why we're even critical of it. You are not actually judging the what on its merits, you are passing judgment on the who. Who do you see using the I Ching for fortune-telling, and how are you passing judgment on that person? Who do you see using the I Ching for philosophical discourse, and how are you passing judgment on that person? And maybe we don't want to acknowledge our association with fortune-telling or divination because we fear how others might perceive our intellect. I would make the argument that fortune-telling is a form of philosophical rumination. If the occult is a category of esoteric beliefs encompassing magical spells, astrology, alchemy, and mystical practices, then the I Ching is a book of the occult. But at least historically within the book's originating cultural context, saying something is the occult holds a very different connotation from what it invokes in the West. Throughout the dynasties, passages from the I Ching have been used as magical incantations. I Ching hexagrams are often used in talisman and sigil crafting. The Bagua 8 trigrams is all but iconic of mystical, occult, and shamanic practices across the Asian continent and the Pacific. Wushu shamanism is a religious culture premised on the belief that selected members of society possesses the ability to communicate with or be vessels to gods, spirits, and ancestors. The I Ching was birthed when Wushu shamanism was the primary religious point of view. A Wushi is a healer, an exorcist, a medium, a diviner, a prophet, and a magus. The word for I Ching divination, shi, is the character for shaman, Wu paired with the bamboo or yarrow stalk, Zhou. Embedded into the Book of Change is the premise that through spiritual cultivation, guided and directed by the Book of Change, you can become a Wushi. Because heaven will tap you as one of the elite members of society to possess the ability to communicate with gods, spirits, and ancestors. So when you consider the 5 classics that the scholar philosopher must master to be initiated into the elite, the Book of Songs facilitates mastery of poetry. The Book of Documents facilitates mastery of rhetoric and political theory. The Book of Rites facilitates mastery of social etiquette. The Book of Seasons felicitates mastered knowledge of history, and the Book of Change, the I Ching, facilitates the philosopher's spiritual cultivation. The thesis I read out of the Book of Change is that the fortune teller or diviner is a philosopher, and the philosopher who engages with the I Ching will acquire the skills and knowledge of the diviner fortune teller. Let's part ways with 3 I Ching exercises. If you will be approaching I Ching the oracle as a philosopher, here's a fun thought exercise. Present a philosophical inquiry to the Book of Change. For example, ask, what does the I, as in the I Ching, think of atheists? Can there be time without change? Is virtual reality genuine reality? Is there such a thing as free will? Are rocks conscious? What is the wrong in cultural appropriation? Consider presenting one of these hefty philosophical inquiries to the oracle. Or present the mind-body problem for inquiry. Are my mind and body 2 distinct entities or a single entity? See how an I Ching casting exercise answers that question. Is there a God? What is heaven? What did the ancients know that we've forgotten? Does time heal historic injustice? How should I prepare for the end of the world? Does it matter whether we have free will? Are you sentient? Address the I directly and see how the oracle responds. What can be done about unconscious bias? These are just a few more examples of questions for philosophical rumination using the I Ching. Follow any I Ching divination method to yield a result. Here's the hard part. Thinking, processing. You will need to reflect on what truly the pithy words the I Ching has given back to you in response means in connection to your question. The process of thinking about that is where the magic is. The Zhouyi makes you work for the answers. That's the training and spiritual cultivation part. Then, once you've achieved a certain level of spiritual cultivation, you become a diviner and can then interpret the I Ching for others. You will be reading the oracle section for the primary hexagram and the oracle for the secondary or transformed hexagram. Read the line text for the changing line of the primary hexagram and also for the transformed hexagram. If your result was a single locked hexagram, only with no changing lines, read the text for line 5 of your single locked hexagram. Approach the line text as a riddle that you need to solve, and if you can solve that riddle and understand the depths of meaning here, you will have unlocked a significant philosophical understanding. The philosopher will identify their own interpretive approach as falling within the scope of a particular school of thought, and that will tell you a lot about your nature and nurture. Your nature and your nurture are the answers to your own question. Once you get the result, here's where you put on your philosopher's hat. Interpret the I Ching's response to your question. Your thought process will deepen your explorations as a philosopher, deepen your wisdom and understanding of the world and your understanding of yourself. Also, how you interpret the I Ching's response to your question will tell you what your philosophy of life is. The origins of the Zhouyi arise from prophesying the outcome of a conflict between 2 warring clans. Then, through the ages, it was used to predict the outcome of geopolitical conflicts and events. Translating that into modern day, think about something that involves 2 sides vying against each other for power, a competitive sports game, politics. For funsies, try to predict the outcome of that athletic or political event with the I Ching. If you were being consulted to predict the outcome and then you in turn consulted the I Ching, what would be your advice and forecast? After that event happens, revisit your divinatory result and reflect on how you interpreted the reading. Were you right? Did you misinterpret? Now, I'd like you to be a little more open-minded than you might be comfortable with. Rerum novarum cupitus, said Carl Jung in his foreword to the Wilhelm translation. Imagine that the oracle is sentient. You will be having a conversation with the oracle personified. If you're feeling skeptical and not inclined to indulge in superstition, open your mind and heart just a little bit for this exercise. You can approach it the way Carl Jung did, utilizing something like the Book of Change to explore the unconscious, to observe the principle of synchronicity in operation. Personify the oracle, the Book of Changes before you, as sentient and omniscient. What question would you ask? Well, the divine, a sentient Tao. For my own reading, I'm going to go with, would you have made the same choices I've made? So I'm going to conceptualize myself in conversation with the I Ching, with the oracle personified. And my question to the oracle as a person in front of me, a sentient being in front of me, is, would you have made the same choices I've made? In your own case, get really personal for this exercise 3. Ask a sincere question from the depths of your soul, being as vulnerable as you can be, and see what comes up. If you're very dedicated, heavily ritualize the divination process for this exercise 3. Take the long road. Do it the hard way. Don't take shortcuts with the ritual. When you receive your revelation, lean in to how the message makes you feel. What is the tone you are intuiting from the oracle? What images play through your mind prompted by the hexagram result? Think about symbolism. What are the metaphysical correspondences at play, and what do those correspondences tell you? The whole point of the Book of Change is what you see when you look into its depths. Use these exercises as journaling prompts. Write out how you interpret the casting result. How do you interpret those lines from the Book of Change? And then, most important of all, reflect on why you interpret those lines that way. What is the rationale behind your interpretation? In other words, explain yourself. The exercise of explaining your rationale will help you to better understand what's in your heart and what's on your mind. Philosophy is the systematic study of nature, reality, and analyzing the fundamental questions of our existence. Divination is the systematic practice of reaching beyond the limitations of our own capacity to receive insights into nature, reality, and the fundamental questions of our existence. I hope this discussion and trying out these 3 exercises with the Book of Change in hand inspires your own considerations of philosophy and divination.